Okay, hello. In the last lecture, we looked at uh, some of the critical factors that helped, um, that the factors that were critical in explaining the rise of a relatively small ethnic group, the Romans, a Latin speaking people centered around a number of islands on the Tiber River, hills surrounding the Tiber River. And eventually they'll come to dominate the Mediterranean. The text quickly gives us two major factors. One being the sort of migration of foreign peoples into the Mediterranean region, which really is, in some respects, a continuation of what we had been looking at with the arrivals of the Mycenaeans, but the movement of the Phoenicians to Carthage and other groups in the circum-Mediterranean region. Um, in this particular case, the text is referring to the descent of Gauls, um, a rather warlike people descending down from northern Europe into the southern regions, eventually coming down into Spain, but also into the Italian peninsula. The role they play here in the rising of Rome is a bit peripheral because what they basically do is they break the back of the Etruscans, a group that had sort of contained the Romans and other groups in the region and had served as the middleman in the great commerce and trade of the Mediterranean. So the Gauls will in effect, defeat the Etruscans, not exactly remove them, but sort of weaken them such that Rome is able to then rise up and develop its own institutions, of which the most critical was the growth of the Roman legions, the military institutions that will be tied to what the text refers to as a war ethos that sort of permeated Roman society. The value of the warrior, the honor of the warrior, give your life to Rome. And out of this will grow a war machine that quickly engages in conquering the neighboring peoples. And what's going to come out of that was something that I referred to as the Roman game, in which the Romans will say, lay down your arms, join us, pledge loyalty to Rome, and you will have the same rights of a citizen, with one obligation: your sons must serve in the Roman legions, which proves to be one of the great recruitment instruments in all of human history. We've been using it today with Latinos from Central America and South America, with the promise of citizenship if they serve in the American Army and fight in Vietnam and elsewhere as well, so that you demonstrate your loyalty through war. This will be an ongoing kind of a thing. Those people are left on the land. They continue to farm the land. They constitute the core of the sort of the freeholder farming population that is the source of the warriors in the legions, and hence are critical to the whole Roman thing. Out of this, we will see that Rome will be able to use this mechanism to, in effect, conquer or bring in all of the different peoples on the Italian peninsula, who are, as you move further afield away from Rome, are more ethnically different and culturally different. And so this game of opening up a Roman citizenship to this people. Of course, all this only makes sense when we understand that Rome had, in the year 509, thrown out the local Etruscan king, the governor of Rome, who was Etruscan. And events there lead to the rising up of the common population, and they throw the king out and they replace kingship with what they call res publica. they refer to government as res publica, which is to say government is now a public thing and not a private thing. The source of our word republic, they will give us then the idea of a Senate, a permanent assembly of the aristocratic families, the males, the eldest male of the aristocratic families who by right sits in the Senate. It's not something, it's not an institution that is voted in. Gradually, then, the common people will develop institutions of representation, the tribunes, the councils, who come from the Senate, but then are chosen by a popular assembly to represent the will of the common people. And indeed they do. And in fact, as we will see later, immediately now, right, we'll see the Gracchus brothers, who were indeed members of elite families, had been in the Senate, who are then chosen to be the councils, and eventually get assassinated because of what happens. Rome will then engage in the Punic Wars from 264 all the way to 104. By the end of the Punic Wars, and indeed after the Second Punic War, Rome is effectively in charge of the entire Western Mediterranean, which will lead them to then conquer the Eastern Mediterranean. And so by the end of it, you have a situation where Romans will point to the Mediterranean to call it Mare Nostrum, our sea. They are in control of everything. Along the way, and after the First Punic War, they had conquered Sicily and two other islands in the Mediterranean. Sicily was extremely important because it was a major wheat-producing breadbasket for the region. And what's going to happen there is the emergence then of the latifundium, the broad-based plantation run using slave labor, who will then, in the hands of aristocratic members of indeed the Senate, often the produce of those latifundio arrive in the markets of Rome and elsewhere, and obviously can undersell the produce of the free farmers, which leads to a crisis in that particular region. The free farmers eventually leave the land because they can't afford it anymore, and you have a crisis in that Roman game, that game of recruiting the strong young sons who have grown up in the fields, working the fields. That will, at that point, is when we saw the emergence of the Gracchus brothers, who attempted to address the issues facing the freeholder families by enacting laws putting limits on how much land an individual could own. This, of course, went in the face of the will of many members of the aristocratic families of Rome, who indeed were the beneficiaries of this process. And both brothers, one after another, several years apart, are assassinating in attempting to promote a reform that was considered to be necessary if indeed the old order were to be maintained. What will happen then is a lack of trust then in the institutions of the state, the Senate, which can no longer deliver on its promises for social justice to the underclasses of Rome, who now look for assistance from powerful individuals, in this case, the generals. And the generals will actually come to replace the Senate in terms of defending the common people, all of which will end up in the form of civil wars, in which one general versus another tries to gain control. And ultimately, it will be the figure of Octavian the adopted son of Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar had come very close to sort of declaring himself the ruler of Rome and the first emperor. But he himself is assassinated by members of the Senate because of what appeared to be obviously a plot to undermine the Senate. And given the history of Rome from 509 forward, with a rejection of the idea of kingship and dictatorship, things like that, right? It kind of made sense. In any case, Octavian, his adopted son, becomes a major general and eventually takes vengeance on those people who had killed his adopted father, Julius Caesar, and eventually becomes, if you will, the first person in a line of individuals that will last for about 200 years that provide what the text refers to as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that under the umbrella of Rome and its powerful armies and its institutions, that whole part of the world, that part of the world being from North Africa up into parts of Europe, all the way up to England and parts of northern France and up to the Rhine River. This whole area then gets incorporated into this umbrella of protection. And indeed, you have 200 years in which commerce, trade, cities grow. It is a period of peace and prosperity, hence known as the Pax Romana. Obviously, it's a title that's given to that period by historians after the fact, once we no longer have that Pax Romana, and it breaks down into sort of a resurgence of fighting back and forth and the penetration of external groups into Rome, which will eventually lead to Rome's decline and fall. But as we said, Octavian will take on the title of Augustus, his most magnificent. So Augustus Caesar, Kaiser, who gains control over the army. And he also begins to take on many of the official titles and will center political power in himself and his family, and is able to then, through his control of these different offices, exercise control over the state while claiming that he wasn't a king and was, respecting the tradition that was part of Rome from the start. Nevertheless, any one individual who becomes this powerful, either here or in China, with the Emperor of China, same kind of a thing, right? Always needs a variety of institutions on the ground to enable that person to dominate an empire so large. I've already mentioned, for me, one of my concerns when I look at this is the question of delegating authority and ensuring that indeed, when I send a person out as emperor's will, under my name or under the name of Rome itself, that person pledges allegiance to me, to Rome, and that I can ensure and indeed trust, which is the critical element here. I can trust that person to indeed follow the dictates of Rome, not engage in rebellion, not raise his own army, the kinds of things, not steal taxes from me, all of those kinds of things. And of course, Rome now becomes so large that it is a challenge. first things the emperors are going to do is, as we saw, leading up to this is a bleeding away of the Roman game, in which young men from families um, that had been left on the farm, in control of the land, um, uh, and they had grown up working in the fields and farming and selling the produce in Rome or local cities or towns. Suddenly, that whole thing with the growth of the slave plantation system is being undermined, and so it is the army that's being challenged here. And what the emperors will be able to do is systematically transform the army into a full-time professional force. Prior to this, the sons of the families who were sent off to war went there for a specific period of time, 8 to 10 years. And when that time was over, they returned home. And of course, they would be returned home as conquering heroes, assuming they hadn't done anything to disgrace the family, maintained the honor. Now, what we're getting is it represents the changes that are being introduced, represents the demise of a citizen army. And of course, a citizen army, and this is what the Roman game has done and was such a powerful instrument in the expansion of Rome. A citizen army is composed of citizens, although not professional. They are fighting for their homeland, right? And so a little bit like, say, in Athens, which did not have a professional army, but had citizens who would be part of the army and called up to fight when they were challenged. Sparta, on the other hand, was much closer to a professional army, right? Indeed, they were just that, right? Athens was different, much more a citizen army. The challenge ultimately is going to be when you move away from it, because when this system is first put into place, they will be calling on citizens to fight in this professional army. And ultimately, you will come to a situation where you rely on mercenaries, increasingly people who fight for payment rather than out of any other sense of loyalty. And ultimately, as we'll see, when Rome collapses, at a certain point in time, the mercenary looks at the writing on the wall and says, the hell with this, right? Okay, I can see where this is going, and they drop their weapons and they run, right? Because there ain't going to be a government around to pay them and this kind of a thing. And so mercenaries, right? I remember when we went into Afghanistan with George Bush, and we invaded Afghanistan. One of the commentators on TV said, well, Afghanistan has a long history of invasion by outsiders. But what people in the region say about the Afghanis is they're good fighters, but you can only rent an Afghani. You can't buy them, which is to say, you can't buy their ultimate loyalty. You can rent them for a while it appears to be beneficial to them, but be ready for them to turn against you at any one point in time. And I think we have learned the hard way and not listened to the voice of history in going into Afghanistan. Be that as it may, since that whole conflict is not resolved, and who knows where it's going from here. In any case, let's see, where are we? Okay, so we now have, and what I was saying is the ultimate result of this will be mercenaries. And indeed, some of the mercenaries, the German-speaking Visigoths, who will come over the Rhine River into northern Europe and then become mercenaries for the Roman army, will then turn around and actually join the Goths and the Huns, who will then penetrate Rome and ultimately lead to the invasion of Rome in the year 410. Down the road a little bit, but not that far, right? But the interesting thing is the events with the conquest of Sicily and then the growth of greed in the empire in the hands of the families, the elite families of Rome, leads right to this endpoint here where mercenaries are brought in to fight the wars that the Romans should be fighting themselves but aren't. In any case, this is the first thing that they will do. And in these professional armies that emperors put together, an interesting phenomenon happens, which is to say that rather than what had been the case before, where those young men who leave the farms to join the armies for a period of time pledge their allegiance to Rome, and they are, after all, Roman citizens, right? So they are fighting for the homeland, right? At this point in time, emperors begin raising their own seemingly private armies, and the soldiers will pledge allegiance to the emperor and to the empress family. This is a very significant shift, right? We've seen some debate recently about that at the national level of our own government, right? If you're aware of events recently, you'll know what I'm referring to. The person of the emperor, as we've seen elsewhere, right, the persona, the public persona of the emperor, should be a victorious battlefield commander, right? And there are indications going all the way back to the pharaohs of that being part of it. In fact, there is, I believe, a picture. Can I find it quickly without throwing us into chaos here? So let's see. Probably here, Tigris and Euphrates. Here's Egypt. But I don't think it's here. So I think it's the next chapter. A marvelous picture. Well, guys. Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of small. It's on 87, page 87. It's right above that beautiful Greek vase with the paintings of the chariots and the horses and the two guys in it, reflecting the arrival of chariots in that part of the world. And above it, who do we see riding on a chariot with a bow in his hand, about to launch an arrow at his enemies, as his horse, I guess there's one, as his horse sort of plows over the enemy, falling between them. These images of, indeed, the pharaoh leading the charge, which probably are not historically correct, but are part of the broader intent to portray the leaders of societies as military commanders, things like that, right? Okay, so um, by the second century BC, so by 150 BC up till about 100, Rome consists of 40 provinces, indeed 40 plus provinces. And each province is, if you will, an independent administrative unit with its own governor in charge. And the governor has been selected and sent by the emperor. Again, the question of trust and delegation of authority. This, of course, was a way up the chain of command and to gain importance. In any case, when you look at um, the institution of governance at the level of the provinces, you can see that the governor is there and he relies on a relatively small group of lower ranking Roman officials. Um, but in comparison, then, with China, which we will be doing, in comparison with the Han Dynasty, or the Qin Dynasty for that matter, but really the Han Dynasty, right? In comparison with the Han Dynasty, which is going to develop a large group of what will be called the literati, those who learn to read and write Chinese, and the traditional Chinese writing system was so difficult. They were the ones in all of the towns spread all over the place. And indeed, the Han Dynasty, by about the time of Christ, has a university that has 100,000 students in it, studying in preparation to join the ranks of the literati, this bureaucracy that rules the nation in the name of the emperor. Compared to that, Rome is kind of like, what's going on there? But Rome is really going to be sort of a little bit what the British did in India. India today is a rapidly modernizing country with a large and burgeoning class of highly educated individuals. And what India was able to build onto was a system of higher education that the English put into place to develop bureaucrats to assist them in governing a nation of 70, 100 million people that they couldn't really do themselves, right? And so just as there, the Romans, and indeed the English took a lot of their stuff from the Romans, but the Romans then were in the same situation, and they eventually came to rely on, as they had to, a local help, right? People in the locality who could read and write and who were able to assist them. Some of these were slaves, ex-slaves, freedmen, right? Who would then become bureaucrats in the state, exercising power indirectly, but being the contacts in the community for the Roman officials, most of whom were not really interested in digging down and getting their hands dirty in terms of governing the local society, and preferred to hand that off to local people. And indeed, with this limited staff then, the governor was expected to guarantee peace in the province, right? That was the first and foremost thing. We've gone in, we've conquered, we've taken over, and by this time, the Roman game is no longer in existence. We are conquering and subjugating people. They are less citizens than they are subjects, but they're still citizens in any way. They are effectively subject to the laws of Rome. And one of the laws of Rome is going to be you have to pay your taxes, right? And so the governor has to keep peace there, but must also then set in motion the process by which taxes can be collected from the province that he is in charge of. Um, you can see the difficulties involved here, right? We already have a staff of locals who are indeed helping us with this, with a lot of the different stuff, right? And eventually, what's going to happen here is the state, in effect, the Roman state, will come to rely on private companies, which are, private individuals in the community, maybe are wealthy merchants, things like that, right? Have a certain degree of status and position in the community. And they will effectively um, negotiate and bargain with the governor for the right to collect taxes in the name of the government. Uh, we call this tax farming, farming out the taxes to other people. Obviously, there are dangers involved in this because the temptation is to use the power to overexploit the people, which then could lead to the uprising of local people. And so the governor has to sort of try and keep tabs on a person. But when you work out the contract, you sort of work out what is acceptable in terms of the take that this person can, you know, um, beyond the what the Roman state demands, and what he can take from the people and get the people to give him. But of course, this is dangerous when you're squeezing money out of the people that are already somewhat um, challenged, if you will. Um, now, Rome is going to expand beyond this, right? Okay, and so you have the provinces, but the word civilization comes from the Latin for city, and indeed, um, Roman civilization is sort of um, connected to the idea of cities, right? And so you have Rome as the essential embodiment of this idea of civilization centered in a cosmopolitan center. That's the heart of this whole endeavor. But as the Romans move out around the world, and indeed as we get into these centuries of the Pax Romana, where there is this massive generation of wealth, commerce and trade over this huge area. Merchants are protected, ships can move freely back, pirates have been removed from the Mediterranean. At the same time that you have this immense growth of wealth, you have an increasing concentration of wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer people. We have seen this in this country. We've heard of the 1%, or indeed the 0.1% of people who are, we could say, almost obscenely wealthy, with billions of dollars and wanting more and more and more and squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. This is always a bit dangerous when you have the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And it can, economists will tell us, it's even dangerous to the economy that promotes these, billionaires, if indeed there is an over concentration of wealth and a growing impoverishment of the population. Who's going to buy the products that you're producing? In any case, what this is going to then produce is that in the core areas of the Roman Empire, right? Spain, southern France, the whole Italian peninsula, around the East Coast, into Egypt and elsewhere, you have the growth of dense urban settlements all around, right? And the towns that grow tend to imitate the Roman form of government and indeed the Roman form of um, drawing up the towns themselves, right? Excuse me. So, local administration will follow the same system of municipalities throughout the region. And indeed, um, this will be, interestingly enough, a legacy of the Roman government to the Western world, the centrality of urban living, right? So I did research in the south of Spain, and as the chapter indicates to you, although not that deeply, Spain becomes, if you will, um, a major source of minerals, things like that, right? But Spain will also be a place where cities develop. And indeed, one of the things that will happen with the military is um, the Roman military as a system will then ensure that if a person retires, having dedicated his life to the Roman legions, there will be cities that are developed for veterans. And they go there and they have their own houses and their own land, and they become communities of veterans. And they begin to then develop following the model of the Roman towns in places like Spain and parts of North Africa, in the Middle East as well, up into parts of England, in fact, and Northern Europe. And so the system of the town was one where you had a relatively dense concentration of people in the town. The town itself is walled. The streets are carefully laid out at right angles to each other, forming rectangular blocks of land, as we know from a place like Manhattan. Um, In the center of town is a large rectangular space reminiscent of the polis in the Greek city states. It is the forum, the town center, laid out when the town is established. Around that, and indeed in a system of clustering these major institutions around the forum, you get the major public buildings that are there. You have markets, temples, public buildings for officials, right? And this is, shall we say, the established format for this extension of Roman rule into other areas. Interestingly enough, Spain, of course, will then together with Portugal, but Spain, that I know better, and certainly South America, that I also know, traditional Spanish towns settled by the conquistadores, the conquerors sent out from Spain to conquer the Americas, will follow this same formatting so that you can go into a traditional town in a country like Colombia or Guatemala or other places, Mexico, obviously, as well, and find this core central area where you have what was originally the forum in the Roman age becomes this central square, which will have a Catholic church on it. It will have the town hall on it for the mayor, and the sort of maybe something like a hotel with a bar and a restaurant on it, but mimicking, if you will, the contribution of Rome, certainly in this regard of projecting the sense that civilization requires a city to truly be whole. Let's leave this at here. Here, I will do one more session on Rome. Okay, so I don't want this to go too long for you. Okay,